But Exxon knew the reserves were there. Exxon knew our impossible position with Venezuela. Exxon knew the tenuousness of our economy. And all the talk that Brother Jagdio had been telling us that we front loading and we back loading and all kinds of things will go to naught for Exxon to recover its investment. A PPP is ruling this country versus when a PNC come coalition, whatever, is ruling this country. Look at the stark differences. That is what we are. Or is it a case that I always say that a country where Guyanese of African descent were brought here as enslaved people, slaved for centuries, were paid zero. Were these descendants not eligible, not capable, would not be given the space to rule a country that they built with their hands and fingernails?
Manners and respect to Mr. Winston Jordan. You is a great man to the Guyanese citizen. As a minister to the South America land, call Guyana. So much negative, so much propaganda. The PPP are trying to tell upon you, but keep speaking the truth. The truth is always there forever. The best finance minister I ever seen in Guyana. Oh yeah, Lord, please guide and protect him each and every day. He is full of knowledge and experience and things that going on in this country. Jordan is a cool and humble man. He educate and dedicate to the society. Over 30 years he give to we in this ministry. Yeah, yeah. Jordan is for all. Lord, no, you will always stand tall. Tall. Yeah. Oh yeah. I am a Guyanese citizen. I never meet you and I never talk to you, but for you good works you have done for this country. I'm singing this song to you, Mr. Winston Jordan. We as Guyanese citizens saying we love you. Yes, we love you. Lord, let no weapon that come against him shall prosper. Lord, you is the God from heaven. You is the God from heaven. Oh, manners and respect to Mr. Winston Jordan. Guyanese, we love you, Winston Jordan. Yeah, yeah.
I want to start out today's part two by referencing the so-called signing bonus. Now, there's a lot that has been said about signing bonus. A lot of it totally misplaced, scandalous, and everything else. One of the things that is bad about social media and the internet and so on is that people, especially those not resident in the country, can say scandalous and scandalizing things in the comfort that they cannot be sued or so on. But when it is said similarly by those domestically, you can't sue everybody. You can't sue everybody. But let's start from the beginning. And where is the beginning? The beginning, I will reference again from Destiny to Prosperity, the book written by Raphael G. Trotman. And in the book, at Appendix D is where he reproduces a statement by Kyle Greenidge, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, that was made in the National Assembly. That was made in the National Assembly on December 14, 2017, on the Exxon quote unquote signing bonus. I put it in uplifted commas because I want to state outright and upfront. Guyana did not get a signing bonus in the traditional sense of signing bonus. And I will read part of it just now. Because Guyana did not approach Exxon for a signing bonus. Guyana approached Exxon instead for assistance to prosecute our case with Venezuela at the International Court of Justice, otherwise called the World Court. But let me read the entire statement made by Kyle Greenidge on December 14th, 2017. And as we go along in the statement, I will try to expand and expound. Because his statement is the definitive word on this whole thing about signing bonus. I could have sued a lot of people, but like you said, what are you going to do? What you're going to do? Some of it, you ever wonder why some people don't worry to get involved in politics? It's because they don't want their name to be stained and their reputation to be ruined. And sometimes my family said to me, Vincent, you went good all the time. Why you accepted Granger's invitation to join his thing? And I said, I don't look back. I look forward. I don't look back. And I ain't having any regrets and so on. I think in my time, I did the job, as good a job as many and better than many others, using my skills that I would have developed over the years, my education, and my reputation. But yes, that my reputation was bruised by what they call politics. That this government or the PPP thought that if they cut off a head or somebody was close to the head, the whole body will die. So they went after me with trumped up charges and so on. But it hasn't ruined my reputation. It might have bruised it, but it hasn't ruined my reputation because people who know me, the most they could say is that he hand tight. But they don't don't know me and never know me to be corrupt, involved in corrupt transactions in all of my nearly 40 years of public service. And people may label me as the poorest finance minister, so be it. I'm not into labels and them sort of thing. My mother inculcated in me. She said, Vincent, take your education and let it be your guide. And let it be your guide. And she of blessed memory, I took her advice. And against odds, I see people talking here about this and that. Listen, I grew up in Station Street in a one-room apartment. The house was divided into four, two upstairs and two downstairs, one bedroom each. And we had a family of 8, 6 children at the time, mother and father. And then it grew to 10, 8 children, mother and father. And at any one time in that 1-bedroom small apartment at 59 Station Street, Kitty, we had uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews, nieces passing through and sleeping right there. We know about pit latrine. We know about posy, trying to empty the posy around 5 o'clock when the lighting come up yet and rush and kite to the latrine for throw in. And people talk about how they grew up, this and that. Man, look, you don't know poverty. You don't know poverty. You hear me talk here several times about going to UG, joining UG, being among the first batch of free education people, 1976. And I'm telling the PNC again, 50 years this year of free education, 1976. 50 years. You should have made it already a banner. But what do I know? Having to walk to UG from Hatfield Street after we moved from Station Street. Having to walk to UG from Hatfield Street. Having to stay on campus after you miss the last bus at 9:30. Or walk out to the public road and wait for a car or a bus coming from Plaisance to carry you to Stabrook Market. And from there you walk to Lodge and Hatfield Street. Having to do the same thing when we move from Hatfield Street to South Prineville. But this program is not about that. I just thought that, sometimes, people sell sweetie and they save chocolate and, and all these kinds of things. Look, this balderdash. That's all I'm going to tell you. If you want to know about saving, talk to me. And I could tell you could do all your saving, but saving 2 chocolate that came from the United States and so on ain't gonna give you a multi-billion-dollar or multi-million-dollar complexes and high-end cars and so on. Ain't gonna give you that. But who knows? Maybe the book has been written on how to accumulate wealth selling chocolates that came as presents, and toffees that came as presents, and Toblerone that came as presents, and cell phones and so on, right? Maybe the book has been written, but I waiting here eagerly to read that book. But back to the signing bonus story. Back to the signing bonus story. He said, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would like to address the issue of a payment made to the government of Guyana by Exxon Mobil in 2016 in connection with what has been dubbed the scandal surrounding a quote-unquote signing bonus. The story, as told by a section of Guyana's media, alleges deception on the part of the government of Guyana, illegal actions by the ministers, and the threat of investigation of the government by the Auditor General, as well as civil prosecution by Mr. Christopher Ram, a private citizen. Many Guyanese will have been reading with growing unease the sensational headlines first inspired by Mr. Christopher Ram. As I read these supposed exposés, I am reminded of the term herd mentality, under which each comment is followed by a more outrageous claim as each commentator tries to undo each other. The facts are quite straightforward. Guyana negotiated and received 18 million US dollars in connection with the signing of a contract for the renewal of a petroleum license. The sum in question was not US $20 million or US 25 million, but US 18 million. You understand? The sum in question was not US 20 million or US 25 million, but US 18 million. Whether or not a contract was necessary is a matter of opinion on which I will waste no time. Suffice it to say, while such payments are not unusual, there is no standard arrangement or formula concerning either the quantum or procedures for quote unquote signing bonuses. Governments have pressed or negotiated with petroleum companies to be paid various amounts in the light of the evolving prospects of the sector or industry. I shall return to this. During the course of 2015 and 2016, after discussions with ExxonMobil, the Minister of Natural Resources proposed to Cabinet that the payment of a bonus on the extension of an agreement by the company be undertaken. Cabinet agreed, and in June 2016, the minister duly reported that the negotiation had been completed. The full cabinet approved the terms negotiated and the arrangements to receive the funds. Nothing about the levy was either particularly secret or illegal. Many agreements are approved during the course of any year without being announced. I think you should take note of that. Many agreements are approved during the course of any year without being announced. The intended use of funds received by government usually determines how they are passed through government accounts. That aspect does not normally attract the attention of cabinet. This was no exception. The background against which this decision was taken is instructive. As we all know, since we have been in office, the Guyana government has found itself in a very tight fiscal situation in that its needs for funding far exceeds the total cost of the goods and services for which it has to pay. At the same time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was participating in discussions under the aegis of the UN Secretary General's personal representative in relation to a resolution of the territorial controversy. There have been times in 2016 and 2017 when we were unable to make timely payments to the legal team advising the government. This is an undesirable situation. It is the responsibility of the Minister of Foreign Affairs to make sure that payments for services contracted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are made according to the terms of the contract. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs had an eye on events due in 2018, and in particular, the need for funds to pay the enlarged team of lawyers that would be required should the UN Secretary General honor his commitment to refer the Guyana case to the International Court of Justice without further procrastination after December 2017. I understand that the cost of a similar UNCLOS, that is, United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea case involving Suriname was over US $10 million. The case that he was referencing in that regard was the one in which the Suriname gunboats removed a CGX rig out of our waters that they claimed. And this matter was referred to UNCLOS, United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, for which, as you know, Guyana won substantially the territory that it had always claimed. And the payment for us approaching there of $10 million was made by CGX or principals of CGX or related to CGX. That is what he was referencing there. We come back to it. Faced by the existential importance of the ICJ case, and given that the case had not been yet referred by the Secretary General of the United Nations to the ICJ, which is the World Court, the ICJ, International Court of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs advised that money be held separately and securely until such time as we were clear as to when it will be needed. Out of concern that adequate funds may not be available from the general budget, that is the consolidated fund, when it was time to pay for these critical services, The Minister of Foreign Affairs advised the President that arrangements be made to set aside sufficient funds to make the payment when needed. More specifically, he asks that US $15 million of the sum received by the government from the ExxonMobil exercise be earmarked for this purpose. It was also agreed that US $3 million be set aside for the funding of urgent training of Guyanese in needed skills such as engineering and petroleum geology. The earmarking of funds is not unusual in Westminster type systems. The monies collected by GGMC, that's the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, and GFC, that is the Guyana Forestry Commission, for example, are earmarked, meaning that they do not go to the consolidated fund in the first instance, if at all. This process is also in keeping with that use for other monies received from external sources, such as the Inter-American Development Bank, especially, where overseas contractors may have to be reimbursed. Monies received are sent to the central bank, the central government's banker, and located in accounts held there. Those accounts can then be kept separately managed, and separately audited in keeping with the rules of those agencies, which member states embrace either when we join the agency or when we sign the loan agreement. By contrast, the money so deposited will be converted into Guyana dollars and transferred to the consolidated fund. In pursuit of the decision of Cabinet, the Secretary to the Treasury gave instructions about the placement of the funds. The central bank, the government's banker, was directed not to utilize the funds to meet any government expenses without written instructions from a named set of persons, the most senior public financial officers in the country. In this case, members may think of it as the equivalent of a suspense account. It is therefore inconceivable that in such circumstances, cabinet ministers and ministers Trotman or Jordan in particular were supposed to be or were the beneficiaries of the funds, and that such an arrangement could be expected to be a secret. Mr. Christopher Ram, a current affairs commentator, has suggested that paying such funds into the Bank of Guyana is a flagrant breach of Article 216 of the Constitution. That bold statement flies in the face of the practice everywhere. In any case, the article in question does not require that the payment be deposited in the consolidated fund immediately. Members are free to have a look at the provisions of Section 37(2) of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, which governs the handling of public funds, which is the topic at issue. That article provides for public monies to be held in extra budgetary funds, deposit funds, etc., until they are credited to the consolidated fund. So, if the manner of raising of the funds was not illegal and their placement in a deposit fund at the Bank of Guyana was not illegal either, what then is the song and dance about? Perhaps it was based on the erroneous belief peddled by one commentator that this was an agreement negotiated overseas. That song and dance arise from an assumption, often explicit on the part of the commentators, that the intention was to utilize the funds for the benefit of the ministers directly involved. Mr. Speaker, just as it is imprudent and nor permissible during the debates in this House to attribute motive, so too in general life. Such behavior may have been the experience of some of these commentators with other governments or in private practice. If that were the intention in this case, however, it would have been quite unwise to invite scrutiny by requiring the authorization by 5 of the country's most senior financial officers to permit withdrawal of the funds from the Bank of Guyana. The very manner of disclosure of the information demonstrates just how porous our system is as regards confidentiality. Given the purpose for which the funds were to be used and its implications for national security, neither the President nor the Ministry of Foreign Affairs saw any merit in advertising the matter. In fact, so great was the concern that only those who needed to know were informed as to the purpose of the deposit. Consequently, only those members of the cabinet directly involved and the relevant technicians were informed. The fact that those who were investigating this matter could have stumbled on the reason for the holding of the funds and still feel it necessary to make it both public and use it for sensational headlines is testimony to the sense of responsibility in certain sections of our media. Ghana recently won a case at the ICJ in which they had found it necessary to retain no less than 48 international specialist lawyers. They never broadcast how they were funding those services. Today, some in the Ivory Coast rue the fact that they had not realized the scale of the Ghanaian mobilization for the International Court of Justice. Obviously, forewarned, they will have taken this into account in their strategy. Let there be no doubt that those who will challenge us in the court will be very pleased at the airing of this controversy in Guyana by Guyanese themselves. More disturbingly, the sensational, often misleading disclosures being passed off as exposés in the public interest follow closely on attacks on international companies operating here. Some of these companies have broken no laws here. They owe us no taxes or imposts. They are operating in neighboring states where they are welcome. But in Guyana, some sections of the media demonize them. Given the potential importance of petroleum production to the well-being of all Guyanese, it can only be assumed that these commentators believe that it is harmless fun and that Exxon, for example, if seriously damaged, will leave to be replaced by one in the long line of six at most companies hammering our doors to undertake or replace the US $4 billion in investment required to bring the discovery to the production stage. On the other hand, we see neither Suriname nor Brazil media carrying such demonization of the very company from which Sunday's newspapers suggest we should have extracted a US $700 million signing bonus. Only in our neighbor to the west are such attacks to be seen. Whilst I'm on the signing bonus of US $700 million, Mr. Speaker, please permit me to say that unlike Guyana, ExxonMobil's submission of such a large signing bonus took place after the 14th round of auctions in a country, Brazil, which discovered oil and began production some 7 years ago, after the discovery of what has been described as a monstrous find of light petroleum. Although Brazil is not yet the world's largest source of proven petroleum reserves, it is already the 15th in world rankings and was consequently able to attract over 130 firms in this round of bids. Most significantly, however, the obvious difference between that neighbor and Guyana is the absence of the shadow of a neighbor claiming practically all their waters offshore in which their enormous reserves have been located. Finally, Mr. Speaker, please permit me to say a word on commentators' asymmetrical treatment of the law and constitution. We have noted the strictures of Mr. Ram, the media, and what one paper called the Transparency Agency regarding the funding of state activities without reference to the Constitution or the Fiscal Management Accountability Act of 2003. So shallow has been their analysis that the leader of the opposition, who was then Barjagdio, can have the gall to announce that in the period June 2000 to the decision on the 17th of September 2007, when the maritime case against Sonam was referred to the UNCLOS tribunal and decided, the government of Guyana contracted service without either paying for them or without passing the matter through the consolidated fund. That story of the state contracting services and being proud to say that it was in the interest of a private company was related without comment from the Auditor General, Mr. Ram, or without any threat of legal action or opprobrium. End of speech. It was a bit long, but necessary to read out in full, because for many of you, I think it's the first time you would have heard about that speech. I think it's the first time you have a full grasp of the situation that inhered at the time. And I think as you digest and as you go back and you play this program, or as you now convinced that you should get a copy of the book or whatever, that you would have come to realization two things or a couple of things. One, you were misled by the noise and nonsense that was being said in the press. You would probably would be impressed by the PR of the PPP at the time, who were able to take such a matter in the interest of the country and turn it into a political issue for which they had, like the Pied Piper, others running behind them with it. And you would have come to the conclusion for the umpteenth time, if only the coalition had a better PR, not propaganda, not propaganda relations, public relations. If only they would have been able to blunt what the people successfully were able to do. And we have some people, you check and you will see, the sycophants, I call them, who, and by the way, it's not only, I shouldn't only call them sycophants. Let me reference something. Go back to September of last year, in the aftermath of the disaster that faced the PNC / APNU in terms of the elections results. Reference the Thursday, early in September, it might have been the first Thursday or so, in which I called for the stepping back of Norton. You remember that? And who would have believed that Congress Place would have sicked the dogs on me? The General Secretary came out bull. I understand he did law. I understand he did law. Came out with a long statement. He did law, and he didn't even know the first thing about law is that you should not rely on second and third hand, or what the lawyers call hearsay evidence or statements. He never listened, but he went out with a big long statement. But the one that took the cake and it was going to move to the courts was an MP, a young MP, not MP, sorry, on the list, on the APN news list, who was on there on social media referencing signing bonus, implying criminality of the signing bonus on my behalf or in reference to me. Forcing a well-known who was with the APNU at the time when we were in power, but now seem to be on the other side, to remark. He quoted the same thing and he remarked the imploding or something to that effect. That in your midst, imagine, if we were not able to educate our own, small wonder that those who are not our own, and this year I'm talking about those who are PNC versus the rest, small wonder that those who are not will listen to whatever their leadership will tell them. But you know how close we came to invasion of our territory? You know the work that was being done behind the scenes, and you are suggesting that that work must be put in the public domain. That work that would involve serious but tenuous discussions. You know how long this reactivated claim by Venezuela has been going on? You know how many measures, different things we have tried? The good after, you know how long the good officer process has been going on? Ask Ram Koran, he had been a good officer for Guyana under the under the um under the PPP from the time they came in 92, post 92. Ask Barton Scotland, he was a good officer under the PNC. Ask all of them, they will tell you how much they tried. But Venezuela always wants you to sit down with Guyana to negotiate territory. And when the good officer process didn't work, we finally decided we had enough of this because Venezuela was holding this thing like an axe on our head, monkey on our backs. So we decided we are going to tell the Secretary General, we need this case now to be prosecuted at the World Court. And this approach was made under Ban Ki-moon, who was the Secretary General at the time. And he promised to make a decision before he left office. But you know, like a promise is always a comfort to a fool. He left office without making the decision to send the matter to the World Court for a decision. He left office. New person came in. And the portents weren't looking good from the time. Because, listen, you have to do all the background work and all this kind of story. New person, new Secretary General come in. Guess what? The new Secretary General is a Portuguese. He's a Portuguese origin and so on. Does that sound in terms of background and so on in Guyana's favor? Yeah? Are you forgetting that Portugal and Spain ruled the world? Spain ruled Venezuela? Yeah? So you have to now counter this. We're not saying Secretary General was ever biased or so on. But in developing your strategy, you have to take account of the fact that he's Portuguese. And then, of course, we go on and tell him now to make the decision that Ban Ki-moon was supposed to make. Instead, he now comes up with a suggestion that perhaps you should try the good officer process for another year, this time using his rapporteur. That he think a guy from Norway, I forget his name, Nylander or something like that was his name, from out in Norway. But look, the long and short is, I think they call that the enhanced good officer process or something. It didn't work. It didn't work. And so we kept pressing the Secretary General to send the matter to the court. Y'all think the PPP left a treasury full of money for the coalition government to come in? I often tell people the PPP were so tired. They were happy to give that brief recess to the coalition while they catch back their breath. And while they blame the coalition and to get back their supporters back into their favor that they were losing favor with and so on. To catch their breath. That's what they did in that small period that we took place in. And they couldn't care less about security now. Don't worry about all these things. Jaguar made it very plain. He will not cooperate with the coalition government except on matters to do with the border. That was made very clear to the coalition government. And what he made clear in statements, he made clear in action. He made clear in action. So you didn't have a treasury full of money. And like I often said, we come in and we say all them problems. bankrupt Guy Suko, a rice industry in trouble, all these different problems you had, serious problems, enormous number of people who should have been paid weren't paid, all kinds of problems. Like I said, they never cried and so on. We took it on board and started doing. So you had to get money to prosecute your case. That is why I said this case that was so important to us, this case that Exxon knew was major to us. And so they got two slices from the pie. On the one hand, they wanted the oil that they knew that was there to replace what was taken from them in Venezuela, nationalized. Chavez had nationalized all the assets, and Maduro had hunkered down on them, saw Exxon as a bogey. As a result, Exxon's balance sheet wasn't looking too nice. But again, we didn't do homework where that was concerned. But Exxon knew the reserves were there. Exxon knew our impossible position with Venezuela. Exxon knew the tenuousness of our economy. So that was a stacked deck. So ordinarily, where you would have gone to Exxon and claim a signing bonus, which they may or may not have agreed to pay, given all the circumstances of where we were, we went with the approach that we were seeking assistance to solve that case. And we had a reference in the previous government of Barrett Jagdeo as president, when Suriname made the huge mistake of using gunboats to chase out the CGX rig, that matter was referred to UNCLOS, United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea. And just like our situation that we found in 2015, their situation was the same thing. Little financing to prosecute this case, but you need heavy financing to get lawyers and all these kinds of people. And they were able to secure CGX paying $10 million that was never ever reported to Guyana, never made public to Guyana until long after we found out how they were able to do the case. It is not CGX going to UNCLOS, it's governments that go there. So the government of Guyana took Suriname to there. But we were never told as citizens of this country that the matter of going there was being financed by a private donor. 10 million US. No, we're not saying anything wrong. We just showing you the different treatment. And we didn't even want to know where the 10 million came from. All we want to know is that we win the case. And y'all remember when they made the announcement that we had won our case at UNCLOS? There was a huge celebration in Guyana. We stick it to them. Huge celebration in Guyana. We stick it to them. We didn't ask how they did it. We didn't ask how they do it. We were glad that it was done, and it was done in our favor. But you have a ruthless person who would rather compromise our security. Compromise our security by talking about signing bonus, 80 million, they go for tea from and that kind of story. And you got people buying into that foolishness. buying into that foolishness that we got to thief money that we put in the Bank of Guyana, that no minister's signature was on any account. All the top people, the accountant general, the deputy finance secretary, the finance secretary, the whoever else at Bank of Guyana, the governor, all these people were involved. All these people were involved. It is the governor and the Bank of Guyana who opened our account at the Federal Reserve Bank to receive this 80 million. All of this eventually was known by the very PPP. But like I said, they couldn't care less. Politics must trump patriotism. And we got a lot of ones running around with them, running with them. Are we so ashamed of ourselves? Are we so directionless? That is what we are? Or is it a case that I always say that a country where Guyanese of African descent were brought here as enslaved people, slaved for centuries, were paid zero? Were these descendants not eligible, not capable, would not be given the space to rule a country that they built with their hands and fingernails? This is what I come to the conclusion about. Because when you look at when a PPP is ruling this country versus when a PNC coalition, whatever, is ruling this country, look at the stark differences. Look at the stark differences. Even our own people. Even our own people. You heard, like I was on a program with Context during the week, and Enrico asked me, he said, you must be aware that they say, but I didn't do nothing for we. But that's another story. I'm not going to go back down that road. Again, maybe that comes from a mindset, and also it comes again from the lack of the PR. But, look how much we did for Region 9, and look where the votes went. So much so that we are cost, that we spend all the money in regions and we spend it. But there's another story. But back to this whole story. So the 18 million, when it came, and given the delicate nature of the discussions with the Secretary General, it's not that we didn't want the Secretary General know that we got 18 million for prosecute the case. He couldn't care less. But the idea was not to do anything, not to do or say anything in public that will provide the excuse for delay or no decision. By the time and so you remember we get this thing in 2016. We got this money in 2016. And we were able to open an account at the Bank of Guyana. Bank of Guyana was subsequently to open an account at the Federal Reserve Bank to receive this money and all. And all this is going on, and nothing of this marked secret. The correspondence that went from the finance secretary to the Bank of Guyana to open the account wasn't marked secret. The Bank of Guyana governor was under no obligation, no threats, no anything from any government officer, minister, or anything to keep the money on the wraps. None. All he got was a letter from the finance secretary to open this account, Exxon Mobil signing bonus account. That was the name of the account. And to receive the monies being paid into it and to put it into an interest-bearing account. That's all he got. He didn't get a letter marked secret, confidential, and all this kind of story. And this was 2016. And then in the height of the disruption of the coalition government that had started to you remember 2017? Remember all this happened in 2017? Remember 2017 was the turbulent year when the private sector and the private sector commission, all them believed that they could take theirs and pass the coalition government with all the statements that they were making and so on, tried to hold the country to ransom, some of them, tried to hold the country to ransom, holding back investment, manipulating the foreign exchange and all this kind of story. Thank God they got a lot of decent people in the private sector, a lot of decent people. I'm so thankful for all of them who we communicated with privately or so. But I had those who were wedded to the PPP, who were upset that we were changing things right before their eyes for the greater good of the country. Upset. But we have this situation now in 2017, because now we know the letter now becomes leaked and becomes a big furor. Big furor. Letter becomes leaked. Oh, we got the thing, oh, special account, blah, blah, blah. All of it, a lot of hot air. Hot air. Hot air. My good friend Christopher Ram, breach the constitution and all kind of story. I've been in budgeting since 1980. From the time I graduated in 1981 as an economist from UG, and I joined state planning. I was in that process of planning budgeting. But I was into big budgeting from 1985 when I was transferred to Ministry of Finance to help set up and head the budget office. And I am aware, and I could tell you, that a large number of special accounts had existed at Bank of Guyana. Numerous special accounts. You check Auditor General reports, they talked about it. These accounts have been set up there, and they existed long after the project would have closed, and and they were questioning why we continue to leave the account open, that they could be they could incite theft and so on. And indeed they had a couple of thefts from those dormant accounts and so on. And they were telling us to close these accounts. But there are large numbers of special accounts. Now you're hearing how these special accounts were illegal and so on. And as Guyanese said in his statement, well, spare thought for all these others. And then you had the PPP run into court. Took the coalition to court about the money not paid over to consult fund. I don't know, as I keep saying, I don't know whatever happened to that case. I don't know whatever happened to it. But yes, took the coalition to court about it. Well, I would have loved to be a witness in that court, in that. Because I would have pointed all them hundreds of special accounts at Bank of Guyana. What was the noise being made about this one here? Beyond some cowardly accusation about theft and so on. And you see why I keep saying how this thing has a stench of anti-blackness, anti-African leadership of the country. It was only the other day, a couple of years ago, the very government, the very people, the very people in which Jagdeo is the vice president. Jagdeo is the vice president, still a vice president. That open special account to receive the monies from the low carbon, from the carbon credits that they're getting from Hess Corporation. They have the money in an account in the United States. Do you guys ever ask to let us see where this account have been audited? There's no reference to it in the Auditor General report. There's no reference to it. The monies are being received in an account. I don't know if it's the Federal Reserve or what, because this question has been asked in Parliament and I don't recall it being answered. Where are the monies being held? What are the arrangements? What are the accounting arrangements? I don't recall them being answered in the Parliament. But nobody's making a fuss. Nobody, and those monies are, look, 18 million, these people are getting hundreds of millions of US dollars. Hundreds of millions of US dollars they are getting compared to the 18 million. And we don't know. Nobody's asking the questions. So you tell me if my assumption that maybe it got to do with who's in power. Eh? Tell me if I'm wrong in what I'm saying. Or the conclusions that I'm coming to. And before that, and I said here again, this time Jagdeo was Minister of Finance. When the Petro-Carib account was established, I think it's at Riggs Bank in the United States. Petro-Carib account to receive United States dollars, representing the amounts that oil companies had to pay for the oil. They had to pay for the full amount for the oil. And the government of Guyana only had to pay what was required under the Petro-Carib arrangement. So the difference was accumulating in the account in US dollars. Special account. Over time, that account accumulated over 1 billion United States dollars. But nobody didn't say until we came in and did a forensic audit of, of that special account that led to charges and so on. All the charges haven't been dismissed for want of prosecution or whatever else they call it. But who asks under what authority the Petro-Carib account was set up as a special account? Many people don't even know that such account existed. But who asked? Who said? Was it a big story by the same set of people who tried to make a big thing about the $80 million signing bonus? Yeah. But I don't mind them, you know. The one I was really flabbergasted on is the one I told you about just now, that occurred in September, when somebody from the party I support can put on Facebook an insinuation about 80 million US dollars. So now they're gone with the same bandwagon. They ain't educating themselves, they run with the same bandwagon. And entrenching what our enemies would have done to us. But Spirit thought the well-managed signing bonus account, and thankful to the Bank of Guyana and their people who were able to deposit that monies and make it earn interest over the period, the short period that it was there. Ultimately, the 18 million US dollars was repatriated to the Consol Fund in 2 tranches. 2 tranches. First tranche on the 24th of December 2018, a total of $3,779,856.12 US was repatriated to the Consol Fund. And on the 24th of January 2019, just about a month afterwards, the balance in the fund of $14,699,226.37 was repatriated to the consolidated fund, making a grand total of $18,479,082.49. So the 18 million that was paid as signing bonus attracted interest of $479,082.49. The same $18 million that was supposed to be stolen and hidden and all these kinds of story. And no one up to this day praised the coalition government for its management of those resources, for the careful use and accounting of those resources. Everybody wants to be part of the bandwagon of criticism, notwithstanding the fact that it was this money that has brought us along to today, where we are. We are on the cusp of the ICJ making a decision within a year on the validity of the 1899 arbitral award that would put to rest juridically the problem we had with Venezuela. No, it may not put to rest. It obviously, they ain't gonna rest if they lose. They ain't gonna rest. They're gonna continue telling the people to get robbed and all this kind of thing. But for us, it will be breathing a bit easier. And for Venezuela, it will be a problem going forward to tell the international community something which the international community already knows. But for the sake of, telling everybody, we are going to take it to the lawyers, take it to the court, let the court make a decision. And remember, this is about the validity of the 1899 award. It got nothing to do with territory and so on. Validity. It's a controversy as to whether this controversy got any merit. That's what the court gonna be ruling on. Y'all must do your homework. In that 1899 arbitral award, Britain, representing Guyana, lost significant territory. You weren't granted anything. They lost significant territory. I don't know where I read it, but Guyana was somewhere the size of between 89,000 and 100-something thousand square miles. And we are down to where we are today. So we lost significant territory, including in the Amacur or Noco Delta, that has the rich tarry oil that Venezuela now has. But the PPP prepared to put politics over patriotism. And you got a bunch of them who following them down the line and nearly torpedoed a delicate set of negotiations and discussions because they come up with something that they must get out the coalition. We only put y'all there for 3 years, not 5, 3. Hence the no confidence motion of Charandas. Everything worked to plan for them. Everything worked to plan for them. A pity. I always say a pity. They don't make them like Bornum anymore. They don't make them like Bornum anymore. So the other point I want to make, so that's it that is it for me for signing bonus. That's it for me for signing bonus. And I hope, as I said, people are more aware of what um, took place and that the monies were always safe and compared to the 2020 2025 PPP governments, compared to the present one and compared to all the previous ones, the coalition would have been a rose among many thorns. Many thorns. You have some people who say, continue to say, oh, um, um, the coalition government sell out and all kind of thing. Well, I told you, I gave you something last week that the coalition government merely um, inherited a PSA from 1999, constructed a bridge to that PSA, where we got an additional one percentage point in terms of royalty from 1% to 2%. Got the issue of the signing bonus, which really and truly was monies for the um, prosecuting the case and so on. But I think what we don't add, the intangible, which in our case, intangibles can't be measured, but implied. We got security on the shelf. And with that security came investment. Because once a major like Exxon was on the shelf, Venezuela had to think twice about what the shenanigans. Once that major one on the shelf and the oil that was discovered, the basin was open now. Before, it was a iffy if this. The basin was open. Even Shell and them ruled the day that they gave up. But the most important thing now, it was going to be attracting majors and minors on the shelf. On the shelf. And continue with the security aspect, the coalition government, and I believe this government too, would have been interested in diversifying the presence on the shelf. So you got a Exxon, you got a Chevron, you got a Hess, but who knows if you could get a BP, if you could get the Brazilian firm, Petrobras or whatever the name, if you could get, the French firm that is in Suriname, you diversify the shelf. You broaden it so that the security on the shelf, and especially with the majors there, would allow you to breathe easier. And that the resources that you used to be having to divert to enhance diplomacy and security, whether soldiers, whatever, and so on, can now be used for education, health, and so forth. That is the intangible that we don't count. We count in cents. So we should get 800 million in signing bonus like Brazil get. Are we Brazil? Are we Brazil? Brazil has a history of oil long before us. Brazil doesn't have a border dispute with anybody. Brazil is the only country, I believe, in South America that doesn't have a border dispute with anybody, with any of its neighbors. Oh, Sonam get this and that. But who Sonam got dispute with in the waters that they have found oil? They don't have a dispute with Guyana in the waters that they have found oil in. We don't put those in. We talk about all situations are different. All situations are different. And the same deal that you're talking about, same deal with Exxon, has been able to put billion US dollars directly into the Natural Resource Fund since 2019 force oil to the end of last year. 8 billion US dollars. Now it's a different story as to what has been done with this 8 billion. But I don't recall in the economic history of this country when 8 billion US dollars would have been earned in such a short space of time. And we're talking here 5 years. Because 2019 December is when force oil came up. Money started going into the fund in 2020. So we're talking 5 years, 8 billion US dollars. 8 billion US dollars of Guyana's money. We're not talking balance of payment where you may have a sum on the balance of payment, but it does not represent monies that actually come into the treasury or staying in the country. 8 billion US dollars have been available to exclusively the PPP government, not the PNC government, not the coalition government. 8 billion US dollars have been as exclusively available to the PPP government. And you got more coming. You got more coming. Thanks to the coalition government. But no thanks to Charandas. Who enabled the PPP. No thanks. But I've said enough. And maybe there'll be a third part next week when we look at now we've come to the stage where we got all this money. Now we've come to the stage where there's growing concern as to the depletion of our reserves, and it looks rather concerning that this depletion of the reserves will be taking place in the context of declining oil prices. And if Trump has his way of a $50 top price for oil, and at a time when production in Guyana will be ramped up to 1 million plus, it means that we will be in a very desperate situation. And all the talk that Brother Jagdio had been telling us that we front loading and we back loading and all kinds of things will go to naught. Why? Because we will be producing more oil at a reduced price, which means that we will never achieve or achieving that situation where we will be getting a higher profit share will be illusory, will be fading from us, because it will require more and more oil at a lesser and lesser price for Exxon to recover its investment. And what is worse, while more and more oil is being dug out of the ground, requiring those wells, lifespan of those wells to be considerably shortened, we will be getting less and less money being placed into the Natural Resource Fund, with deleterious effects on quantitative growth. That's the building all them roads and buildings and D&I and all these different things. But let's leave some for next week. I hope, folks, that you enjoyed today's session. And until we meet again, God spare. Goodbye now.